So, welcome back. Episode 2, next day. Did not know it was going to be this soon. But, Granddaddy, this episode is going to be about you from ages 15 to 24. So, this is years 1950 through 59. Because we went through 36 to 49, so now it's 50 to 59. So, the first question is just about your family life and about where you lived during this time. So we'll start like early, so like high school and stuff. Like how was home life during that time?
All right, that period you described, son, would be the latter part of junior high through college, and that would include my marriage to your precious
Yeah,
grandmother.
early marriage as well. But
Yes.
let's start with. So
Okay.
this is a kind of a this is a
Or,
big episode, but
okay.
let's start with like junior high, high school. How was your home life during that time?
Well, my home life was fine, son. Uh, my daddy did a wonderful thing for me, which was he was very forthright with me about finances. And he told me that I really needed to be careful with the money that Roy Eckert and I made in our little businesses, that he was struggling financially to support my two sisters and my mother, and he really wanted me to handle my own needs other than, he said I could live in his house rent free all the way through college if I wanted to. Uh, and also, if I ate what they ate, I could eat with him and my mother. So my home life was really good. I was not at home very, very much between school and work and study. Uh, I really just slept at home and
Yeah,
shower. I didn't shower. We didn't have a shower. We had a bathtub, so I took a bath,
yeah.
and my mother would always leave some good food out for me when I came in late.
So
So,
how long did you live there? When did you move out?
well, I lived there until grandmother and I married.
Really?
I accepted my father's offer to let me live at home while I was at the University of Houston, and so I did. I was rent free and food substantially
Yeah.
food free, so I lived there until grandmother and I married, and our first little apartment was when I moved out.
Really? So you never lived alone before?
No, no,
Never in your
I
life?
never have,
Wow.
never ever.
So, what was your dad doing for employment during this time? Like like right before you moved out?
Well, as we discussed, my father and ancestors had been farmers, and when we came to Houston, my dad worked in the shipyard,
Mm-hmm.
and he was tremendous with mechanical things. He just had an innate ability for electricity and mechanics and just anything mechanical. So, one of the big dealerships in Houston sent him to a school uh, to polish off his skills as a mechanic. So he worked for numerous automobile dealerships as a senior mechanic, and then later he had the chance to establish his own auto repair shop. It was small. He had an assistant, and he had a young man who would hustle parts and take customers home. And my mother was his cashier, and then I submitted his tax returns and his sales tax returns and kept his books.
So, how old were you when he opened that shop up?
Well, I was in high school, so I was somewhere around 16.
So, when you were 16, I keep forgetting. Like, tell me about your siblings again. So, it was you, and then you had two sisters, you said?
Yes, yes, I had two sisters, uh, Anona, who was 2 or 3 years younger than I, and then my sister Erlene, who was 5 years younger. And so she was a baby when we came to Houston.
Yeah.
Um, and then my sister Anona met this young man from our home area, Jacksonville, East Texas, and she married very, very early. She married when she was about 16, and I, So
How did that go down?
well, it was fine. They had a good marriage, and they had some children and some grandchildren, and neither one of them lived a long life. Her husband died first, and then she died. So
When did they die?
well, very young, probably early 20s.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
How did
yeah,
that happen?
they were very young. Well, my sister had diabetes, and I really don't
Type
remember
1?
remember why Wayne had died.
Did she have type 1 diabetes?
Son, I really don't know. I just knew she had diabetes,
Yeah.
and it then led to heart problems, and one thing
Yeah.
leads to another.
And that was the sister that was, you said 3 years, or that was the 5 years?
No, this was the one just younger than I.
And so what about your other sister?
Well, my sister Arlene um, uh, is a sweet girl. I always has been a precious girl, and we talk. Her husband died, and your daddy and I went to visit them when he was in his final days. Your daddy was kind enough to drive me to East Texas, and we visited with him and had one last talk to him about his eternity and about
Yeah.
the status of his soul. And so I'm very appreciative to your daddy for taking me.
Yeah, that's great. And she's still alive?
She is alive, and after he died, she uh, moved out west with her daughter, and she lives with her daughter, and she has three wonderful granddaughters, all of whom graduated from Arizona State. They both with scholarships and their own work.
Oh, really?
They worked themselves through Arizona State, and so she has 12 great grandchildren.
Wow.
So,
Well, you got to catch up.
so
You're lacking behind.
I'm working on it. I'm
Yeah.
hopping the whip, but we've got three precious ones so far.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. So about that trip, real quick, how did that go down? Like, where were they living at the time? Explain that story.
Well, my sister's husband inherited a very nice little country house up on a hillside with acreage and an incredible view, and they improved it and put in some central utilities, and they put a porch on the side that looked out over a mountain and a valley, and so they lived there. And when he died, she sold that property and moved out to Arizona and lived with her daughter.
How far where that property is? How far is that from where your childhood home was, the childhood farm?
Well, it's more toward Texarkana. It's a little town called Linden, and really there's two towns that are contiguous. One is Linden, and the other is Athens, Texas. So they're just a little south of Texarkana.
So how far would that be, do you think?
Well, it's a pretty good little distance because we were more due east.
Yeah.
Jacksonville and Mixon are more due east, and this is up Highway 59, right on into Texarkana.
And so that's the sister that we're talking about.
Yes.
She wasn't really alive when you were at the farm as a little kid.
Well, she must have been born right toward the end because it's really difficult to reconcile all the ages and exactly when
Yeah.
something happened.
Yeah.
But I think she was born right toward the end
Okay, that's interesting.
because she's a 5 year difference. So if I were 7, then she should have been about 2 years old.
That's interesting. Do you get to speak to her very often, or?
Yes, by telephone. I call her on a regular basis, and we chat. Talk mostly about children, grandchildren, and
Yeah.
great grandchildren.
Is it hard that you have one sister that grew to old age with you, and then your other sister who like died very young and never even got to be older. Is that hard to like to deal with, or how do you?
Well, at the time, it was considerably harder
Yeah.
because everything was fresh. What happens to you with age is that things begin to grow dimmer,
Yeah.
and even sad events are more distant in your memory.
Do you have any like with the sister that died? What was her name?
Anona, Anona.
Do you have any like? What's your like favorite memory with her, or like what is a standout memory that you
Well,
have with her?
she was just a very athletic sister. In that age bracket, we just didn't wear shoes in warm weather. Just absolutely did not,
Yeah.
unless it was something fancy. And so I can remember her just running down the street, and she could run like you wouldn't believe. And that's one of my happiest
Yeah.
memories of her. Just watching her running down the street, laughing and yelling.
That's great. Do you know if she was a Christian?
Oh, she absolutely was. And that's sort of an interesting question because she was extremely spiritual. And that really happened after she married and after she moved away because although both of my sisters went to church with me, I don't want to digress, but my mother made sure that I had a ride to church, and then after I learned how to get there, well, I took my sisters and we would walk to church. And so she had a little bit of a foundation, but she had not made a decision to become a Christian while she was at home. But after she married and went back to East Texas, she became just immensely spiritual, and we had some great conversations about spiritual issues.
So you think she's in heaven? You think you'll see
Oh,
her again?
absolutely, no doubt in my mind.
That's so great.
No doubt in my mind.
And when she died, like before that, were you keeping in contact with her, or like how often would you see her before
Well,
she
not
died?
very well, son, because the timing was when she married at 16, I would have been 21, so I was wrapping up college and working, and so I was busy, and she was now a married lady,
No.
and then had a couple of babies, and so no, we really didn't stay in touch very well, which I regret, but
Yeah.
it, at the time you do the best you can.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. So you were older than your sister, so you wouldn't have gone to school with them, really?
No, my little sister uh, went to Stephen F. Austin, where I had graduated.
Yeah.
And one of our favorite stories was when you ran track at Austin, and if you placed in the national meet, you got this magnificent long sleeve sweater with a big uh, A on it, A with wings denoting track.
Yeah.
And so the big deal was that most of the boys gave their sweaters to a girlfriend to wear, and I never wanted to do that. And so I gave it to my little sister, and she wore it to school all the time. So when she was in high school and I was in college, well, she wore my track sweater to Austin High School.
That's so cool. So how was school for you? Like high school and junior high school, how was that for you?
Well, son, I loved school. Uh, early on, I realized that if if I'm going to get out of this poverty cycle, I've got to develop a profession, and I need education. So I liked school, and I worked really hard at it. Like most folks, some subjects came easy, and some were more difficult. And so I worked very hard to try to get top grades. And so I loved school, loved my teachers, and I made some lifelong friends who were teachers, and there were probably four teachers that I kept up with well into my marriage and until they died.
That's really cool. What was your favorite subject?
Well, I really liked economics, and I liked speech and debate, um, and you know everyone knows, but during my high school years, I really thought I was being called to be a preacher, and I did get to preach. Youth of Christ was in its heyday during those high school years, and so they provided opportunities for young men to preach. And my own pastor was a magnificent man, and he let me preach in his church, and so uh, those were some of my favorite subjects.
Interesting. Yeah. And so, when you were graduating high school, when you were graduating, did you think you were going to be a pastor then, or by that time did you know?
Well, I did till the very end, son, and I won't go into the boring detail, but through a wonderful Jewish lady homeroom teacher, Miss Goldie Rose Lowenthal, uh, I was presented this banking scholarship. So I just said to the Lord, well, maybe I've heard the wrong signal, and so let's let this be the fleece. Let's fling it down, and if I get the scholarship, then I know that you did not want me to be a preacher. If if one of the other high school boys gets it, then I'll know I'll just stay right on course to pursue the ministry. And so I won it, and that was the conclusion.
So I forgot to ask this last episode, but how did you like become a Christian? Like when was the first time you decided that?
Well, son, to try to abbreviate, and I know your granddaddy is famous for being wordy. Uh, Grandmother says I'm a man of few words, but I repeat them regularly. When I was 10 years old, uh, I had an exposure to Christianity, and I really wanted to become a Christian. And I talked to my mother about it. I told her I wanted to go forward in church, make a profession, and be a Christian. And my mother was a Christian, uh, marginally, because my daddy was not, and so she felt like with three little children, her highest calling was keep the marriage together. So she went hunting and fishing with my daddy on the weekends, and so I would call her a marginal Christian. But I asked God, thank God that she got me into a church. She made sure the lady in the next block, Mrs. Woodruff, took me to church, and so uh, she was very conservative, and she said, "Well, son, you're young. You're mighty young." She said, "I want you to be a Christian, but I want you to know what you're doing." She said, "I don't want you running down the aisle every time an evangelist comes to town and you're saved and resaved and rededicated." She said, "I want you to make a solid decision, be comfortable in it, and then live your life with it." So she said, let's hold it in abeyance for a while. So I did that. I honored my mother for 3 years, from age 10 to 13. I I don't really talk to many people about this, but I really think somewhere in that time frame, I really did become a Christian, because the way our little rent house was situated, I didn't have a bedroom, so we had a rollaway bed that was behind the door in the hall, and my mother would roll that bed out at night and put it under the fan, and I can remember just endless numbers of time lying there in that little rollaway bed with a fan buzzing above me, and just talking to the Lord and saying, I want to honor my mother, but I want to be a Christian. So I think in all those private conversations, I probably did make a decision. But when I was 13, though, uh, one Sunday morning I was in church. It was the Christmas holidays when I was turning 13. Uh, and so I decided, well, I love my mother, but I'm the one that needs to follow that Bible verse, profess me before men. So I walked down the aisle, and at least publicly, I became a Christian when I was 13.
Yeah. Well, that's so cool. And you said that you were exposed to it at 10. Do you remember how you were exposed to it?
Well, I do. Two ways. While we were on the farm, my daddy took every kind of job he could get that paid real money. And one of those jobs was road construction. And he drove a dump truck. And because he was so capable mechanically, he worked on all the dump trucks that broke down. And so, as a reward for that, instead of money, they let him borrow a little trailer house, a little tiny trailer house. So my mother and my sister and I went with him. So for a time frame, we left the farm. He did road construction, and when you have a little trailer and you're traveling, a big challenge is find a place where you can park at night. You've got to find some kind of commercial establishment where you can plug into electricity and have water and a sewer facility. So one of the places where we stopped was behind a grocery store. And across the street from that old grocery store was a Pentecostal church. My mother had a good sense of humor, and she called them holy rollers. And so on Sunday morning, the grocery store was closed. And I would go around to the front of the grocery store, a little old bitty kid, and I would sit on the shady side of the gas pump. And the windows of that church were just right across a dirt road, and so I could hear everything perfectly. The windows were open, no air conditioning. I could hear the Pentecostal songs and the preaching, and so all the time we were in that phase, well, I heard all those sermons, and so it really made an impact on me as a little bitty guy. So that was my first real introduction.
Did you ever go inside the church?
No, I never did. My daddy really had some doubts about it all, and he sometimes on Sunday morning he'd say, "Jules, where is Roy Joe?" And she would say, "Oh, he's around front listening to those holy rollers." So no, I never went over there. That I would have gotten a good spanking for that.
You were sitting over there like in the shade, and you just heard it.
Just lean up against the gas pump in the shade.
But did you do that to listen to it, or were you just doing it and then you heard it and then you started doing it?
No, I went to listen because I enjoyed the songs and I was interested in what he was saying.
Yeah, that is interesting.
In fairness to Pentecostal preachers, they are pretty forthright in what they say, and their messages are highly evangelistic.
Well, which must have been great for you.
Yeah, I loved it. It just didn't last long enough. We then moved on. I won't go into it, but one time we had to park behind a honky tonk, and so way into the deep night, I could hear these country western songs. Sometimes grandmother will say, "How do you know that country western song?" And I say, "Because when I was a little tiny boy, I heard it half the night."
That's funny. And so you were pretty young when that was all happening? That was like during the time on the farm?
Yeah, that was during our farm years.
How long would you be gone at a time?
Son, I really couldn't quantify it because he went off for that. He went to the CC camps. Actually, I was not born in East Texas, although I lived my life there and all my relatives were. Somehow my daddy made a connection where he would be a tenant farmer, and he moved out to a place called Grassland in West Texas, and so my mother went out there with him, and we had a little old sharecropper shack that did not have it had doors and windows, but there were no windows and no doors. There were just the openings. And so my daddy made this cage for me where it had steel bars and the air would come in, but he was afraid an animal would hear me crying at night. And
It was like out the window type, like it was like a cage that like extends out the window.
where the top folded down. You'd open it up during the daytime, but then the top was solid, but the sides were bars.
I think I've seen those before, and they would just put you in there.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
At night, and so actually, I was born in West Texas, in grassland, and that's what my birth certificate shows. And
Interesting.
although I'm an East Texas boy, so my dad did everything he could to make a dollar. He was a very enterprising, hard-working fellow.
And so, to get back to like when you were in high school, when he opened up like his mechanic shop, or even before that, did he ever teach you any of that type of stuff, or were you ever interested in that, or like?
Well, son, I'm really impressed at the perceptiveness of some of your questions, because that's a very interesting thing in my psychological makeup. My grandfather and my father did not want me to know anything about mechanics because they were afraid if I developed any skill at mechanics that I would be a mechanic. And they wanted me to not have anything to do with farming and mechanics and dirty hands. And my daddy's hands were all gnarled up from a lifetime of hard outdoor works. And they had a saying that you've probably heard me say before, both my grandfather and my daddy. They said, son, be anything you want to be in life, but it must have two qualities. You must have a career where you wear a white shirt, and you must work in air conditioning. And so when it became to anything mechanical, my daddy would always say, I'll do that for you, son. I'll do that for you. You need to study. Or
Really?
you need to do something else. And he purposefully would not let me learn
So
mechanics.
you really never picked anything up?
No, none. And as you have probably aware, I have no mechanical ability at all, period.
Do you, looking back, like as an adult, are you glad that he did that, or do you wish that he would have taught you at least a little bit, just so you could have extra skills?
Well, again, a good question, son. I think a reasoning person would love to be semi-skilled in many, many things.
Yeah.
But he and my grandfather actually were pretty wise about it because it served me extremely well. Grandmother thinks I'm smart, but I'm really not. I just chose a few things and worked really hard at that few and really gained some expertise in some areas. And so if I had dissipated my efforts, maybe banking would not have come so readily to me, and the Lord wouldn't have blessed me in that area. So in the main, I'm very appreciative to both of them because I loved banking. It was not work; it was just a delight.
So you said your grandfather also wanted you to do that, or so you didn't mention him before. Who was he?
Well, this was my grandfather on my daddy's side, and in many ways, both grandfathers were alike. They were both farmers, but my grandfather, Roy Saunders, from whom I'm named, never achieved much financial stability. He never owned a farm. He always was a tenant. He always worked someone else's land and never gained much stability. And so he really wanted something better than that for me.
So when you were living at the farm, where was he? Like when did you interact with him?
Well, he also was in East Texas and in the same general area, and so he had rented farms that were not all that far away from where my grandfather Thompson actually owned outrightly 121 acres. So we had contact with him during all those years, and he was a delightful man, and my grandmother Saunders was just a loving. Uh, she would have made a perfect movie star as a country grandmother. She was. I have pictures of her, and maybe you have some. She was just what you would envision as a gray-haired country grandmother.
So, so your grandfather, that would be my great great grandfather.
Great.
So
Well,
like two
let's see.
greats, because your dad
Yeah,
is
you're,
my
you're
great.
right. You're right. It
So
would
it'd
be
be
your great great.
yeah.
That's right.
So how was my great great grandfather? How was he similar and how was he different from my great grandfather? So how was your grandfather similar and different from your father?
Well, interesting. And there were both. There were similarities. They were both country boys. They talked like country boys. They thought like country boys. Their delight in life, their weekend entertainment joy was going to the river and shooting birds and animals, and we did eat whatever they shot. They didn't shoot just for sport,
Yeah.
but both of them were fishermen, hunters, outdoorsmen. They they were both tough as a boot.
Were they
Uh,
both born in Texas?
yes, you are multiple generation. I'd have to sit down and count, but I would say you're absolutely sixth generation Texan, and more than one side
Yeah.
from your daddy. You're several as well as your mother, but I'd say through your mother, you're at least sixth generation.
So was it my great great grandfather? It was his parents who came here, or was it his grandparents?
Well, I can't say absolutely. I can't say absolutely uh, because when I was born, my granddaddy Thompson died
Yeah.
rather quickly, and so I never knew him. But he was here though, owned the farm, and my grandfather Saunders was here, and so I wasn't bright enough to make great inquiry about their fathers, although I do have some old pictures of farther back.
Interesting. So back to the question: how are they different? How was
Well,
your grandfather and your father
okay, we've
different?
talked about how they were alike, a great deal alike. Uh, they even looked alike. Both of them kept their hair all their life, and they both had massive hair. And then from my mother's side, my uncles and I don't have massive hair. Uh, but how they were different. My daddy was really more of a hard worker than his father. His father, my grandfather did, well, I guess he had to do it. I don't want to be judgmental, but it was a terrible thing for my daddy. My daddy was really a bright fellow, exceedingly intelligent. He just picked up anything just instantly. And so when he was in the third grade, his father said to him, "Son, I got 8 children and I can't support them all. These old farms that I rent will not support this family." He said, "I need for you to drop out of school and work in the fields." So my daddy left school either during or at the end of the third grade. So,
So this was like early. That's like 1900s, like 1910, or
well, I'd have to calculate, son, but of course it was a long time ago, and it was vastly early in his life,
yeah.
and he never quite got over it. He did it because he really had a strong sense of duty, and his 7 brothers and sisters just loved him. He was more like a father than a big brother,
He was the
and
oldest.
Yes, my dad was the oldest of eight,
And so were you.
and my mother was the youngest of 16. So all my daddy's life, though, his brothers and sisters flocked to him. My Aunt Joe that I talked to you about sending me to the first grade bought the house next door to us. So she lived next door to us. And every time his brothers or sisters got in trouble, they always came to him. We lived in a little old shabby rent house up on blocks, but we had for a time, actually when I was in high school, we had a late model Roadmaster Buick. We didn't have a garage to put it in, and the reason we had that late model, the car cost more than our house cost. My Uncle Mac bought the car, and incidentally, I loved him. He was a wonderful man, but became alcoholic. He couldn't make the payments on the car, so he came to my daddy and said, "I can't pay for this car. If I just give it to you, would you pick up the payments on it?" So my daddy did, and so we had a car we had no business owning. It cost more than our house.
Wow. That's
when
great.
we finally bought a house.
Yeah.
Our house cost $10,000, and the car cost at least that.
That's wild. So when did your grandfather die?
Well, I would have been in high school. My grandfather Saunders and my grandmother Saunders came to live with us, and there were seven of us living in the little rent house with one bathroom. Seven people, one bathroom, no shower but a tub, and so they both died living with us. So I was in high school when they passed away,
Okay.
and my daddy had them taken back to East Texas, and they are buried in East Texas cemeteries.
So this is another question that you might have already answered, but who do you think is the oldest person that you've ever talked to? Who was born the earliest in history that you spoke to?
Well, I'm thinking about it, son. Uh, I guess my grandmother Thompson, because she lived a long time. She was in a bed, and
That was the one that was like 90 years old, or
yes,
yeah.
she of course was the owner
Yeah.
of the farm, and then when she died, my mother and all of her siblings who were still alive inherited a divided interest. It was not undivided. They actually partitioned the farm, and my mother got the 21 acres that were across the road with the pigs and the barn and the woods.
So do you have a memory of her?
My grandmother?
Yeah.
Yes, I remember her exceedingly well. She was mentally bright, but I don't know what all the issues were. The only issue I ever thought about was 16 children would pretty much kill any lady.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And in those days, none of them were hospital.
Yeah.
And of course, I was not born in a hospital. I was born in that sharecropper shack out in West Texas.
Yeah.
My mother always said that I got there before the traveling doctor got there. He just came by later and say hello.
That's funny.
But to answer your question, I guess would be my grandmother. It would have been inadvertent if I bounced into someone else.
Did she ever tell you a story of like something from a long time ago, or like something that happened? Or
Well, I wish she had, but no, she really did not. She really did not.
because it's just so interesting. Because from now on, in the future, everything will be recorded, like on what I'm doing now. But you lived in a time like before that was available to the common person, so a lot of like all of your aunts, uncles, grandparents, all that. Their stories are kind of being lost. So
Well, you're totally correct, and that's one of the reasons that I'm enjoying doing this with you. I know, son. To anyone who is silly enough to listen. I confess this is one grand exercise in self glorification, and I truly don't mean it that way, but I think there is value in knowing where you came from.
yeah,
There's sort of a stability to knowing you had a beginning. There were
yeah.
ancestors who struggled, and
I really love to hear about it because I think about that all the time. Like I know it's like it's not a very Christian ideal, but I always think about like I don't want to like I don't want to disappoint my ancestors. Like not that they're watching me or anything, but just
well,
like
well, I
you know,
follow that, and
yeah,
I think that's a very healthy feeling because everyone should have some regrets in life. And one of my regrets is that I wasn't quick enough to realize I need to talk to these senior relatives because I had aunts and uncles that lived to old age and had experiences and knew
yeah,
things, and they were in wars, and they really really knew the depression firsthand.
yeah,
And I wish I had asked more questions.
yeah,
Uh, Now, I do have some documents, and my mother gave me the old family Bible that has a history in the preface to it.
Do you
And
have that around here? No.
yes, and,
Do
and
you
I'll,
think?
I'll show it to you.
Yeah, maybe at the end we can look at it because
Yes,
that would be really helpful for the podcast and stuff.
well, I'll show it to you.
Well, that's really cool. So, we really haven't talked about what we're supposed to talk about, but it's okay. It's great to talk about these other stuff. But going back to, we'll go to graduation. So you're graduating from high school. Do you know like you said that you got that scholarship. What happens after that? Like, how does things develop?
Well, son, one of the great things about that scholarship, really the most fantastic thing, was not the money. The money wasn't slouchy. I was happy to get the money, and and it was a very adequate scholarship for that day. It paid all U of H expenses, which meant that all the money I had saved up to that time was available to me for investment, and and the thing that really was so beneficial to me for a lifetime was, along with the scholarship, came a job at the Houston National Bank. The bank arranged with the finance department at U of H. Every class was 7 to 10 in the morning. The bank didn't open till 9, so I could be in the bank by 10:30. So I really was not very late in
Yeah.
getting there. So all those 4 years, the bank management rotated me through all of the departments of the bank. So when I graduated, I not only had a rather prestigious degree from a good university, but I had been in every department of the bank, and when I made my exit of that department, I always wrote a paper on the department, its function and its management, which was a nice side benefit. The managers of those departments were very, very kind to me because they knew I was going to write a paper, and they wanted me to tell the management of the bank that they were doing a wonderful job and it was well run.
So like, what were different departments? Like, what would be an
Well,
example?
in those days, things were very basic. I graduated on Friday night at a Jewish temple, Temple Emmanuel, and Monday morning I started at the bank. So I did not go to school that first summer. I did do college work in future summers, but the first summer I did not. So the first summer, everyone starts as an outside runner. They call you a mullet. Senior manager refers to outside runners as mullets. So you carry paperwork to other banks and businesses and return items and collection items. So that was the first 3 months. Then the departments were just methodical. I was in proof and then transit foreign items, in collections, in statements. Uh, I spent probably 2 years in audit because the audit function is to examine every department of the bank. So working in audit teaches you every department, even if you never worked there.
Did you have a favorite department?
Well, my favorite was if the Lord God blessed you, you got into the credit department because the credit department was the route to senior management. If you if you did well in the credit department, you were made assistant credit manager, then credit manager, and the credit manager was the man in waiting to go on to the commercial loan platform and become a commercial loan officer.
Is that how you? Is
Yes,
that the path
that
you
was
took?
my route, and all senior management was at one time a commercial loan officer. Uh, Advertising and public relations and auditing and all those backroom functions were never senior management. They were just at best they were middle management.
So before we get into like the bank stuff, can you explain to me the timeline of of you going to the military and going to school and like working at the bank? Like how does that? When does all that happen?
Well, it's like many things in life. When it's happening, it's a challenge, but in the long run, it worked out beautifully. And the bank was just incredibly kind and decent to me. Uh, I had I graduated from college. I was an officer of the bank. I was credit manager. Grandmother and I were married, and we actually had bought our first house. So life was moving along.
How old were you?
Well, uh, I have to think a minute, son. You remember I joined the Naval Reserve in high school. So I was called to active duty in 1962, and grandmother and I had not been married long, so I was early 20s.
Because what year did y'all get married?
Well, in 1959.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll save y'all's marriage till the next episode because
Okay.
that'll be a big topic. I know and
Okay.
everything.
All
But
right.
you didn't go. You went to college and you were working at the bank when you went to the military. Like you had already done all that.
Well, that's right. That what you just said was past tense. I graduated college. I'd been at the bank for several years, the 4 years of college, and then subsequent years. Grandmother and I were married, and we owned a house. And so, uh, after I'd been in the Naval Reserve about 7 years, the Cuban Missile Crisis developed, and so President Kennedy activated all reservists. So my ship, which was stationed in Galveston, was called to active duty. So all my U of H graduate buddies and I went into the Navy.
Wow.
And grandmother stayed at home and took care of our house. And ultimately, she sort of mothballed our house and she moved back in with her parents.
So what position were you at the bank when that happened?
Well, I said I was credit manager, but I think maybe I was assistant credit manager when that happened because I remember when Aunt Alice was born in that first house, as well as uh, Aunt Susan. We had begun to have some of the Lord's financial blessing by the time your mom was born. We had moved out north and we had a pretty nice new house, built a new house when your mom was born. So that was pretty much the situation.
So you were at a position at the bank where it wasn't like they were okay with you going, and then you could just come back and still work there. Like
Well, yes, and that's worth speaking to just a minute. I lost my train of thought about Aunt Alice because on her birth certificate it asked for the employment of the father and it said assistant credit manager. So the bank was incredibly good to me. I was gone in round figures a year. So the bank continued my salary all the time. I was in the Navy.
So they kept paying you,
Yeah.
even though you weren't working at the bank.
Well, someone, I think we had a junior officer named Jim Bledsoe, and Jim circulated the rumor that I would never come back to the bank. He said, when Roy gets out of the Navy, he's going to get offers much better than what he's got here, and he'll never come back to the bank. And so the bank management and I were great friends, and we had a marvelous relationship, and they wanted me to come back. So they did all kinds of things for me. They continued my salary all the time I was gone. They gave me a Christmas bonus when I wasn't even there, and I got a raise while I was gone. And then when I came back, they gave a very nice raise to me when I came back to the bank. So we had two salaries during that time. Plus, grandmother continued to teach.
So that was you were making a lot of money during that time.
It was a prosperous time for us, relatively so.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to talk grandmother later, but I can't tell you how fantastic she's always been. And if anybody thinks I've had any success, after giving credit to God, I give credit to your grandmother because she
great.
supported me. We never spent any of her salary. Her salary was saved because we both agreed before we married that she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom and I wanted her to be. We both wanted children, and I did not want her working. I didn't want my children's mother working. So we saved her salary during all those years. We were afraid if we got dependent on her salary, then she couldn't quit. So it was never in our budget. We never got reliant on her salary.
Yeah.
So she was just fantastic, and especially doubly so when I was in the Navy. She wrote a letter to me every day that I was gone. Every day.
Really?
So.
And you got them all and you read them?
Oh, I saved them.
You still have them?
Or? No. Some of them were a little bit romantic in nature, and I didn't want anybody reading them. So,
that's cute.
Anyone who is listening to this is young, and it's hard to think of their parents and great grandparents as being young and in love.
Yeah.
But we were just like you're in love. We were in love.
No, yeah, that's really beautiful, actually.
Your grandmother was just incredibly gorgeous. She's the most beautiful girl I ever saw, and so she's been super. But that's next chapter.
Yeah, we'll talk. We'll get into that whole story next time.
Okay.
But just to wrap up this episode, what about college? How was that? How were your classes? Did you how was college life during that time?
And with no credit to me, I was a very unique college student because the bank had a special relationship with the finance department. And every one of my professors knew I was a scholarship boy and that I worked full time at a bank. And in their heart of hearts, they knew that in many categories, I probably knew more about banking than they did. So they showed great respect to me. And I got the bright idea to take my finance groups on tours of the bank. So the bank would prepare a nice meal in the boardroom, and my classes would go up to the bank and have a tour, and so I was treated in a very respectful way by my professors, and sometimes in the middle of their lecture they'd say, "Mr. Saunders, how does a real credit department work? How do you approve a loan?"
That's crazy. That's crazy.
And another way that was most unique was that I didn't have time to be changing clothes, so I had to go straight from college to the bank. And so if the weather permitted, I had a coat and tie on in class. And if it was just too warm, I'd leave my coat in the car. So I was always dressed as well as the professor was.
Wow.
And And I was not the only one, though,
Yeah.
because U of H students by nature have jobs.
Yeah.
Mr. Cullen founded that college on the basis that it would be a college for working students.
Yeah.
So there were other students that were nicely dressed also.
And what years did you go to U of H?
Well, I graduated in 59 and graduated high school in 55, so it would have been between 55 and 59. I really graduated in 3.5 years. I took some summer classes. When I got to go into the credit department, that job came available, and I still had a lot of college remaining. And so I wanted the job, and I knew if someone else took it, it could be years before I got another chance. So the bank and I made a deal that I would go full time 2 semesters in the summer, and they would hold off. They wouldn't fill the job until I went to summer school 2 semesters, and then I would ease up. And so at midterm, my senior year, uh, grandmother and I had met by then and determined to be married. And so I only needed 6 hours to graduate, and I took those at night at the downtown school. So in effect, I was out in 3.5. I was off campus
Yeah.
in 3.5 years. But I loved U of H, and it's no big secret that my primary love is Baylor, but I'm very respectful of U of H.
It's also really improved these last few
It
years.
contributed to my career, and I made friends. And even those college professors later on in life, when I was getting bank charters, I would use my old college professors to write the economic report. And this sounds funny today, but I would pay them $5,000 to write the economic report. And that was a ton of money as a little part-time gig for a college professor. So they loved it. I mean,
Wow.
they solicited those jobs.
That's great. So you kind of explained it earlier, but how exactly did it go down of you getting the scholarship and you were able to, out of high school, work at the bank and go to school? How would that all go down, and like how was that able to happen?
Well, as a preface, son, I would say that's my alibi for not spending more time with my sisters and more time with my parents. So I alibi, and I say my rationalization is I was working, going to school and at church, and trying to have some social life and
Yeah.
meet a few girls, and so although it was stressful, it worked extremely well because the first part of your question, and I'll really try to be brief, which is not easy for me, but my homeroom teacher learned about the scholarship through her Jewish synagogue, and one of the very oldest and biggest banks in Houston realized every senior man was elderly, and they needed some young blood fast. So they decided they were going to give, for 6 years, 6 scholarships. So in the first year, one boy from every high school in Houston, there were 8 high schools then, so there were 8 boys trying for the scholarship. They had to write an essay, and they had to come up to the bank and give a little speech to the board as to why they'd be the best banker and the best choice for the scholarship. So I was the last one. I was number 6. And so she knew about all that, and she just made up her mind that that scholarship was going to be mine. And I told her, well, thank you so much, Ms. Lowenthal, but I'm going to be a preacher. So she just wouldn't take it. She went to the committee by herself. I didn't even go to the school committee. It was the principal and several key teachers. And she told them, I've got this boy, and I want him to have this choice from Austin High School. So that became the Austin High School one of 8 boys. And so that's when what I told you earlier happened, that I told the Lord, well, let's direct me. If it's scholarship, I'll be a banker. No scholarship, one of the other boys gets it,
And so you had to go and talk to the board?
Yes,
How
yes.
young were you when that happened?
And Ms. Lowenthal was on my back all the way. She even told me how to dress. She said, "Okay, now," she said, "I know you know how to dress," but she said, "Don't dress down, don't dress up." She said, "Wear a sport coat and a tie and a pair of slacks." She said, "Don't wear a suit." She said, "I don't want that board to think you're too affluent, but," she said, "I want them to know, though, that you would look nice in a suit. You know how to put on a tie."
Yeah.
And so she told me how to dress. And when I wrote my essay, she took it and she taught shorthand and typing and all that. So she gave it to my English professor, who graded it. He corrected all spelling and English and punctuation, dressed it up, and then she had her girls type it. So by the time it went to the board of the Houston National Bank, it had correct English and spelling and
That's
punctuation,
great.
beautifully typed,
Yeah.
all because of Mrs. Lowenthal.
How did the interaction with the board go down? Were you super nervous? Like,
Well, it went very nicely. I just rehearsed and rehearsed so many times that it was in my brain. I didn't have to use notes or anything.
yeah.
So I just sort of talked to them. And I won't go into it, but also as an extracurricular activity in high school, I was senior officer of the Junior Achievement National Bank of Commerce. So I told them about all those experiences, that I'd already had experience in National Bank of Commerce, and I had, because the National Bank of Commerce sponsored that high school group, I'd been on tours of the bank, and so I really liked banking and knew something about it already. And I told a couple little banking stories that I'd picked up along the way. So it went well,
That's
and
great.
actually, the senior public relations officer who handled it all for the bank, uh, at the conclusion of my visit, said, "Well, Roy, let me suggest you go on home, because I want to call you as soon as the board makes a decision. I'll call you either way." He said, "If you get it, I'll tell you, and if you didn't, I'll thank you and uh, let you know the outcome." So I went home, and of course, after a while, the phone rang, and Mr. Murphy, who also became a great friend and a good mentor, told me, "Well, Roy, son, you won it." And so I did one of the few bright things of my life. After he told me that, I called a local florist and I ordered a big bouquet of roses and had them deliver it that same day to Austin High School. In and they delivered it in the middle of one of Mrs. Lowenthal's classes. So on the card, I told them just write. And in those days, I was still Roy Joe. I told them to write, "I won, Roy Joe." And so this guy comes walking in the middle of her class and gives her this big bouquet of roses. She starts bawling, and some of the girls were friends of mine, and so they told me about it later. She really came unglued.
That's a great story. So that's really interesting. I never really knew about all of that.
So it was click click after that.
And then it all
School started,
just kind of came together, and that's a great
and
path. That's,
it, there's a lot to be said for having organization in your life, and not any choice. 3 hours, school, bank until nighttime. Everybody else is gone. I stayed at the bank and studied. And so uh, there were no real distractions. I got home, everybody was in bed. Uh, got up 5 o'clock to be at a 7 o'clock class. They hadn't gotten up yet.
yeah.
So it was, and I really wanted to save that money. I was pretty stingy. I call myself frugal, but it was stingy. And I was tight as could be.
So, do you remember how much you were getting paid when you first started working there?
I do. I do. I made $265 a month. And I thought that was gigantic. $265
wow. A month.
a month.
That I make more lifeguarding today than
Yeah, that's quite correct.
yeah,
That is quite
that's
correct.
crazy.
And that was a hard month of work because on the audit department, sometimes when we would do a comprehensive audit, we might be there most of the night.
Yeah.
And then I had to take a bath and go on to school.
But was that a good amount of money? Like, how much would you say that would
Yeah,
be today?
it was very fair, and I just loved it because scholarship was paying all my expenses, and actually the scholarship had some walk around money in it, so I was able to save nearly all my take home pay.
Really? That's great. And that really just helped you get married and all that?
It really did. It really did. And even way back there, in college, I started buying bonds, and so I had. And when we get into that session, one of the great dates grandmother and I had was to go to a friend of your great grandmother's house and watch colored TV, and we counted my bonds that night.
That's funny. Well, we'll wrap it up, but just a couple quick questions
All right.
just to end it.
You've been very patient. Thank you.
Oh, well, it's great. It's great to hear all this stuff. But first question, were you interested in any professional sports at that time? Like, how were sports at that time? Because you see videos of like old timey sports, and it's a lot different. And like, how was that? Like, did you listen to baseball, or like, what was your favorite sports and stuff?
Okay. Strictly high school and college. U of H in those days, and I've already confessed what a saver tightwad I was. When you enrolled at U of H, you were required to buy an activity book, cost $8, and you could get in every U of H sport of every kind with a sheet card off that activity book. And so, if you made some girlfriends who were U of H students, they had activity books. So you could have a date, go to a U of H sport, and all it cost you was gas and maybe an ice cream cone.
Yeah.
So sports really only U of H at that time. And of course, Roy Eckert and I played football 1 year, and then I ran track 4 years. But I was skinny, and so was Roy. We were both skin and bones, and we were beaten up and scraped all the time.
So what was your opinion on sports? Like, you can just go through all your life. Like, were you ever interested in watching sports? Like, because obviously you like Baylor stuff now, but
Baylor really came later. Baylor was part of the grandmother package.
Yeah.
Son, not really. The only reason I was interested was I had I already had an activity book, so using it was free, and so it was an incredible way to have a date and not spend any money.
What are your favorite sports to watch? Like,
well, clearly basketball, girls basketball.
Yeah.
I love girls basketball. The 20 years with Coach Kim Mulkey, Baylor winning multiple national championships. I love. Grandmother and I watch every Baylor game. We have ESPN Plus, so we watch away games, home games, men and women. So clearly, college basketball.
What got you into college basketball? I said, what got you into college basketball? Like, what made you start watching it?
Grandmother, and your great grandmother and grandfather were Baylor folks, and so it was just a family thing. And when Kim Mulkey came to Baylor, suddenly a nondescript girls Baylor basketball team became national champions.
Yeah.
And so with Kim Mulkey's first year, and of course in our younger years, we went to the games in Waco. And I'll bet you've been to one of those games.
Yeah.
Because we always, once we had grandchildren who were old enough, I can remember carrying your sister Margaret out of that stadium. She was so tiny, she couldn't stay awake till the end, and she was just conked out. And so I carried her from the field house to the car.
That's cute. Whenever you were like a kid or like I guess maybe more of a teenager, were there like were there famous athletes that like you knew about? Like today it would be like LeBron James or like it would be someone like that. Was there someone equivalent to that back then?
Yes, there were two really fun things during my elementary school years. One was we had little league baseball, and so I played second base for the Denver Harbor Braves,
Ooh.
and Roy Eckert and I both played little league baseball, so we liked playing baseball.
Yeah.
Uh, and then also, all the do-gooders were trying to give some kind of subsidy to the poor kids of Denver Harbor. So there was a group called the Knothole Gang, and the Houston professional team at that time was called the Houston Buffaloes.
Really?
The Houston
They were a
Buffs.
baseball team?
They were a professional baseball team.
Really?
They were
In the MLB? Or was it different?
Well, all I remember was, son, they were the Houston baseball team. There were no Astros.
Yeah.
All that came later. Oilers and Astros
Yeah.
came later. So they let poor kids in the neighborhood be members of the Knothole Gang, and they would furnish transportation for us and take us to the Buff ball games. So I went to a lot of professional baseball games as an elementary school kid,
Really?
just on the subsidy.
Do you remember any like famous players like from on the team or anything?
Well, I remember one, and the reason I remember him was later on his daughter was in high school with me, beautiful girl. His name was Solly Hemus.
How do you spell that?
Well, I'm going to guess. As you know, I'm a outstanding speller.
Well, just try.
Solly, Solley, and then Hemus, Hemus. I bet you can look him up, even if that's not good spelling.
Sally. Wait, Hemus. How do you spell Hemus again?
I think it was Hemus.
U-S. Was it Solly? Like
Solly, yeah.
S-O...
Solley, or maybe Ley.
Let's see.
Solly Hemus.
See if I know who this is.
I'm almost sure the last name was spelled Hemus.
He looked like... Is this him?
Well, does it show his team name? I really wouldn't even remember what he looked like.
We'll look at his Wikipedia.
The Knothole Gang was way up in the stars. Played for the Houston.
Oh, he
Buffs.
died. He died about 7 years ago here in Houston.
Yeah. Well, I knew he lived in Houston because his daughter went to Austin High School with me.
Yeah, but it says... Oh, I think that these teams changed. Wait a minute. There's a little tangent here.
Okay.
But I think that... Oh, maybe not.
Well, he may have played other teams later, but somewhere in his biography, it should show the Houston Buffs.
Yeah, it says the St. Louis Cardinals, the Philadelphia Phillies, and it doesn't say anything about... But it says he lived in Houston. Oh, that's where he died.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. As you know, even today, although I'm not a great fan, I read the newspaper, and players play for a lot of teams, and they go free agent.
Yeah.
You know how all that works.
Well, I'm just saying that he has kind of a short Wikipedia page. It might be incorrect. Or
It may be, but he just got promotions later on, got
Yeah.
better positions to play.
That's interesting.
But he's the only one I really remember.
So you would say he was your favorite athlete growing up?
Yeah, I'd say.
That's pretty cool.
Really, my favorite athlete was the guy who lived across the street from me. when I was in elementary school, he was in high school, and he played quarterback for Milby High School, and his name was Sammy Gentry, and he was my hero. He's a big old husky guy.
Do you know whatever happened to him?
Well, I do, regrettably, and I'll make this quick, but years later, after, and he was considerably older than I. He was playing high school football when I was in elementary school.
Yeah.
So years later, when I had High State Bank, he came to me, and
And he remembered you?
oh yeah, yeah. His sister Peggy was in my class.
Oh, okay.
And we were friends with their parents. You know, they lived right across the street from us, and
Yeah.
they were in a rent house too. They were low income folks, just like we were. So years later, though, when I was president of High State Bank, he came to see me, and we visited a while. And then ultimately he told me, he said, "Roy, I hate to tell you, pal, but I'm alcoholic." And he said, "I'm really down on my luck." He said, "Could the bank loan $500 to me?" And so I told him, "Well, Sammy, I have an obligation to the bank to only make loans that meet a certain level, uh, but I'll give you $500 myself." And I told him,
That's nice of you.
I said, "I've got to disclose this to the board of directors because there's prohibition about any bank officers making loans because the board does not want an officer to see a good loan and say, 'No, I won't make it for the bank. I'll just make it myself. I'll
Yeah.
make the money as an individual.'" So I said, "This is not a loan. Sammy, I'm just giving it to you." So uh, anyway, a while later, I saw Peggy at a funeral, and she told me that Sammy had died. I didn't know when he died, so I was
Do you know
not
what he
at
did
his
for a living?
funeral.
Do you know what he did for a living?
Yes, he had a very menial job for the gas company. His daddy was a natural gas company, Houston Natural Gas Company employee, and then when Sammy graduated from high school, his daddy got a job for him there, and it was not impressive. It was sort of like a meter reader, that kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting to see how people's lives, like, how they end up going.
Well, it really is, but he was sort of my athletic hero at that time. I
Yeah.
thought, in addition to being quarterback for Milby, he also played on a senior level of baseball, little league, and he pitched, and he was a magnificent pitcher. He could have played college ball, but he just lost himself.
So during that time, the popular sports were baseball and football, like, or like was basketball? Was it on the, like how popular was basketball back then?
Well, first of all, you're right. The really popular sports were football and baseball. Baseball was really popular both as a participant and on a professional level.
Yeah.
But in in the rent house we were in across the street from the Gentrys, there was a vacant lot, and there was an old pecan tree, big pecan tree on the back of that lot. So we found a discarded front door, and we nailed that front door on the pecan tree and put a basketball goal on it. No net, but
Yeah.
a basketball goal. And so all the guys in that neighborhood would come to that vacant lot, and it did not have one weed on it. That ball had bounced on the ground so many times. There were that whole solid vacant lot was
Yeah.
smooth as could be.
So you would play with them?
So we played basketball, and the first organized basketball was at Edison Junior High School, because the gym classes were so massive. They had to play a little game where you had a team and you dribbled down the court, shot a crib shot, dribbled it back to the next guy.
Yeah.
So we got our taste of organized basketball in junior high school.
So that's really interesting. So do you know what year that would have been of y'all playing?
that would have been about 50, 51, 52. I played one school game. Uh, Edison did not have a track, so had an old beat up bus. It took us over to Milby High School to run on Milby's track. So I was running over there one day, and I'd met the basketball coach, really a nice a guy named Joe Lyles. And Coach Lyles came up to me and said, I need a favor, Roy Joe. Uh, he said, I got some guys sick on the team, and we've got a ball game tonight. He said, would you just come on over to the school with me and let me suit you out and play with us tonight? And I said, well, sure, that'd be a delight. So I did. I played one game, one time, one night.
Do you remember if you got any points or anything?
For the school team. Well, the thing I don't remember. The thing I do remember was we'd already worked out for our track exercise, and I was really had to suck it up because I was droopy and worn out. No, I don't remember any glory performance on the team.
Did you guys win?
I don't even remember that. I do remember he did not ask me to come on out for the team afterwards.
Did you sit on the bench most of the time, or were you actually?
No, I was in the game because that was the reason he asked me to come. He didn't have enough players.
Oh, so there was no bench? It was just you five?
Well, there probably was a bench, but
it was very small.
But I was not on it. Wow. That one game, I had my glory basketball season.
Because that's something I'm really interested in. Is not just like basketball, but like the history of basketball. Because unlike other sports, basketball has evolved so much, and like if you took a player from today, and like if you took me, and if I went back in time to when y'all were playing, I would be the best player on the court just because the game has evolved so much and we know so much more now. So like, was it? How was the play? Like, was it? Did you notice a difference of like nowadays versus like back then?
Well, you're totally correct to begin with, Benjamin. Not only has the game changed, but the players have changed. They're so much taller.
Yeah.
I was 5'10" in high school, and I was considered tall.
Yeah.
My friend Roy Eckert was about 6'1", and he was considered a giant. I mean, he just was head. And of course, a lot of Hispanic young men are not tall.
Yeah.
And so about half our population was Hispanic buddies. And so you're totally right. The game has, even the rules have massively changed. And I would have to stop and think a while, son, to sort of enumerate the changes. Among other things, there was no 3-point.
Yeah. See, that's what I'm saying. Like it was a lot more emphasis on like layups and stuff like that.
Yeah, and the free throws changed. I'd have to try to remember a little bit, but there was something different about the free throws.
Yeah.
Maybe you shot one and you didn't get the second one unless you made the first one for a shooting foul.
Interesting.
But there have been massive changes.
Yeah.
And even the height has changed, and the distance of a free throw has changed.
They've changed. No, they've changed a lot because like other sports haven't really gone through that. Like baseball is very similar to how it was back then, but basketball has really updated a lot.
Well, you're quite correct, and girls basketball has changed more than boys. Yeah. Oddly enough, my mother played high school basketball. She was a high school graduate, which was pretty phenomenal in those days. But she gave some pictures to me of her in her little bloomer uniform and talked to me about girls' ball. But there were all kinds of rules, like they could only dribble maybe 3 times, and then they had to pass the ball.
Really?
And so,
that's
and I think it was half court to start with.
That's crazy. Because that's just so interesting. I really wish I could go back in time and like see that. Because like during your lifetime, there were a lot of developments, like a lot of players that like just totally changed everything. And that's like one of my big interests is like the history of that. So it's cool to.
That would be a fun study.
Yeah. Well, we've probably gone for too long, So.
Well, I appreciate your patience, my man.
I appreciate you
it's
talking for
been
this
fun,
one.
whether anybody listens to it or not.
Yeah. So next episode 3, we'll talk about first off your marriage and how you met grandmother, and your young adult years. So that'll be we talked about today. We talked about from 50 to 59, and so we'll talk about 60 to 69 next time. So
All right.
that'll be a lot more about your career and about your marriage. And so also that when was Aunt Alice and Aunt Susan born? They were born.
Well, grandmother and I were married a few years, about 5 before Aunt Alice came, and that was deliberate, because we really wanted to build a financial foundation, and we wanted to buy a house, and we wanted to get some furniture paid for. So Aunt Alice came in 5 years, and then Aunt Susan came, round figures, 2 years later.
Do you remember the years?
In the same house. So they were both born in our first house, and your mother was born in a fancy new house out north.
Do you remember what years they were born?
Well, I sort of interpolate. If we were married in 59, so 64 for Aunt Alice.
Okay.
She's listening. I'm probably wrong.
So well, either way, that'll also be next episode, is the birth of your first 2 daughters, and then we'll get to my mom.
I've got it in their files.
All right. Well, we'll end it today, but thanks so much.
Thank you, son.